Time now for Back Pages tonight here on Sky Sports News, bringing you a first look at the sports stories in the morning's newspapers. And joining us tonight are the Sun's chief sports writer Dave Kidd and the sports writer and broadcaster Henry Winter. Welcome to you both. Let's quickly run everyone through the back pages then, starting with the Mail. Daily Mail's Craig Hope claims Eddie Howe was not among the 10 candidates spoken to by the FA around the England job because he was too expensive. There's also a warning for Thomas Tuchel on the right-hand side of the page about a summer fixture row, a taste of things to come perhaps. The Sun's back page has Sean Dyche saying the England job isn't the dream role it might once have been, while on the left, former England defender Ben White gives an interview saying he's the least professional player at Arsenal, but he gets away with it because he never gets injured. Hopefully that's not tempting fate. The Times, Pep Guardiola's future remains a huge point of debate. The Times digital platform carries an interview with Ederson stating the club is ready for life after their boss, and there's a replacement ready if needed. The Daily Telegraph has the twin shadows of Gareth Southgate and Thomas Tuchel disappearing for Erik ten Hag, that says the Manchester United manager still has challenges ahead. Right, we're going to start with the Mail. And Dave, it says here that Eddie Howe was not even on the England's shortlist. FA snubbed to Newcastle manager before they plumped for Tuchel. Tell us about why that is.
Yeah, I'm not sure it was exactly a snub because it really is a case that Eddie was too expensive. He's under a long contract at Newcastle United on big money there, and the compensation needed to have got him out of Newcastle would have been massive. I think there was a feeling within the FA last year when it was looking very likely that Gareth Southgate would leave after the Euros, that Eddie Howe, who'd had a slightly disappointing season at Newcastle, might end up leaving St James's Park by mutual consent, and then he would become the perfect candidate for the England job. I mean, he is almost certainly the outstanding English manager at the moment. But so to call it a snub, I wouldn't quite agree with. But and I'm slightly sceptical about how many English candidates were actually spoken to. Mark Bullingham at the press conference with Thomas Tuchel I was at yesterday said there were English candidates spoken to. I'd be interested if Eddie Howe wasn't one of them, whether that would be a plural more than one, because I think Graham Potter would be the only other obvious English candidate, perhaps Frank Lampard as an outsider. But I do believe that if you're going to try and get the best man for the job, then the best man for the job is not English at this point. I think if you're looking at a short-term appointment, which is what they've gone for, to specifically designed to try and win the World Cup, having got so close in a couple of tournaments recently, then I think that candidate can't possibly be an Englishman at this point, even if Eddie Howe had been available. And Eddie Howe, quite frankly, wasn't available to them because it would have been far too expensive.
Henry, just picking up on what Dave was saying there, I mean, the best man for the job, not English, or do you happen to think that Eddie Howe is the best man for the job? He's just tied into this contract.
Well, we talk about being tied into the contract, and if the compensation £6 million, and if the FA had actually thought that he was going to be the best man to galvanise this brilliant collection of players and win England the World Cup, if you win the World Cup, that's worth about £40 million in prize money. That's roughly what Argentina took home for winning the last World Cup. So the money is, you have to put it into that perspective. I'm sure they didn't speak to him. I'm sure they also probably didn't fancy a fight with the Saudi owners and the number of lawyers who are floating around central London. And Newcastle would have fought to keep him, and it could have been a painful and expensive battle. So I do find it strange that they still didn't target him, because what is the whole FA and English coaching structure about? Got a £120 million coaching hub at St George's Park. They're very good coach education people in there. But at the moment, there are 350, 400 English managers with a pro license. Spain have got 8 times that number. Germany have got about 3 times that number. Italy have got 3 times that number. So I think that the broader issue here, as Dave's alluding to, is that the FA also have to look at their own coaching structure, whether they're investing enough in that. But I think the fact that they didn't even consider or didn't talk to Eddie Howe, I think, is even more embarrassing for them and their coaching structure generally, because they should be promoting English coaches. But coming back to your original point, he is the best man for the job. You know, you can actually support him and wish Tuchel well and hope that he does win the World Cup with England, and also have issues with the FA also needing to invest more in English coaching. They're not mutually exclusive positions. So I think Tuchel, you know, you wish him well. He's got a big job there. It's 18 months and he has to deliver. It's win or bust. But at the same time, the FA have to be addressing the coaching pathway.
OK, just staying with the Mail before we move on to some comments from Sean Dyche on this. FA risk row with top flight over summer friendlies. It's also in the Telegraph with Tuchel plunged straight into club versus country row. Dave, a couple of international friendlies that are looming in the summer that clubs are not going to be too enamoured about.
Yeah, we don't know for definite yet, because this might depend, I think, on the where England finish in the Nations League group, and also on the World Cup draw that's happening in December, as to whether there even will be room to play friendlies in June. But if there are, there'll be a lucrative offer on the table to play in the United States, possibly Mexico or Canada as well. It's quite, you know, it happened in the past where England have gone and played a tournament host the summer before a tournament. It happened the last time that a World Cup was held in the USA, but England actually didn't qualify for the tournament itself, and England then lost to the USA. So I hope that's not a bad aim. But yeah, I think it's an interesting one. It's certainly nothing to do with Thomas Tuchel. I've seen his name linked with this, but he's wandering into a club versus country debate, perhaps. And I think one of the issues he's got, one of the things he's got to learn from in terms of Gareth Southgate's successes, is that Gareth did more than anyone to build bridges with club managers between the FA as an organisation and clubs. He was very instrumental in stopping the culture of almost all-out war between clubs and the England setup, which used to result in a lot of dodgy sick notes whenever there was an international break. And those issues went away over the last 8 years largely. And Thomas Tuchel was not quite such a clubbable man as Gareth Southgate. He's a bit of a firebrand. He can make enemies, and it'll be interesting to see whether, it's a broader point to these particular friendlies, whether Thomas Tuchel can keep those same excellent relations with the leading club managers. OK, let's move on to the Sun then. Henry, a colleague here of Dave's, Ken Lawrence, writing that England's not the dream job. Those are the words of Sean Dyche, suggesting that lots of bosses didn't fancy the Three Lions. He also stresses he wasn't one of those candidates spoken to, but that actually, I guess, with the stresses and strains and scrutiny and everything else, it's not maybe the job that it once was.
Well, it's a third of the money for 3 times the grief. If you look at the scrutiny that the England manager gets, I mean, Gareth Southgate handled it very well. He was a brilliant diplomat. He was a great role model and ambassador for the Football Association. But he had to handle all sorts of non-sort of headers and volleys, normal sort of football preview questions. You know, whether it was taking the knee, whether it's migrant workers' rights, whether it was gay rights, heading into Qatar. There were so many issues, non-footballing issues, as we'd call them, that he had to handle. It was very interesting. Thomas Tuchel yesterday at the press conference that Dave and I were at Wembley, he referred to it as that it was very much a sort of football role. Well, good luck with that, because he's going to be asked about everything from the price of bread to the Prime Minister to the weather. So Sean Dyche is absolutely right in alluding to the scrutiny that they're under. He also, further on in that piece and in pieces elsewhere, Sean Dyche raises the issue of really what are the FA doing with this coaching hub that they've got at St George's Park if they're then going to go foreign with the coaches. What sort of message does that send to those players who are leaving the professional game and wanting to head into coaching, who are forking out £13,000 for the pro license, where they actually could get it cheaper sort of elsewhere. But what are the FA doing? Is there now a glass ceiling for aspiring young English coaches who may be dream of the England job?
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, Wayne Rooney's made a similar point, hasn't he, on this? Dave, what's your take?
Yeah, I agree with what Henry's saying, but I think that the blame lies chiefly with Premier League clubs themselves, who have been reluctant to appoint English stroke British managers increasingly reluctant over the years. And the more money that goes into the Premier League, the higher the profile the Premier League has worldwide, there's going to attract more and more of the best managers from all over the world. It's just market forces, and it's going to be therefore more and more difficult for English stroke British managers to get jobs in the top flight. If you're not proving yourself to be successful in the English top flight, it's going to be very difficult for you to become a meaningful candidate for the England job. Gareth himself failed, I suppose, in his 3 years at Middlesbrough in his final year, ended in relegation, and then went through the FA pathway, if you like. He had other jobs and then became the under-21 manager before he got the job. That avenue, could have been open, but Lee Carsley, over these couple of, Lee Carsley's a man who had no managerial experience, very little, although he played top flight football for a long while, no real time in the spotlight, and he struggled with that the last couple of months. It's very difficult to find somebody who can come in and handle the magnitude of the England job if they haven't had that Premier League experience. I do feel sorry for Lee Carsley, by the way. People like me were hounding him with questions about his own future in Helsinki a few days ago, and I think it's pretty apparent that he knew an appointment was about to be made and ended up having to go on camera and fudge the issue.
Yeah, quite right on that with Carsley. I think we got that impression. Now we know the full context of what he was probably going through in those media conferences. Let's just move on to the Telegraph and Jordan Pickford. Henry Pickford faces battle to keep the #1 jersey. I mean, he was very much the first name down on the team sheet, wasn't he, with Gareth Southgate? But he played against Greece. He didn't play against Finland. Is he now under pressure? I guess this is one of the things that Thomas Tuchel will in time decide. But for here and now, under Lee Carsley, he's not necessarily #1.
Well, I mean, that picture tells a story, because that was in the Greece game. And if he's got John Stones behind him and he's sort of heading towards the halfway line, he's about to be ambushed by the Greeks, leaving his goal untended. That is pretty risky. And Tuchel won't sort of like aberrations like that. One thing you have to say about Jordan Pickford, I think he's got 71 caps and he's never let England down. He never let Gareth Southgate down. He was brilliant in the penalty shootouts, where England have been notoriously bad and the goalkeepers have rarely actually got close to saving a penalty. Pickford looked, whether it was his psychological mind games with the takers beforehand, and also we've seen him, I think it was one of the Nations League shootouts where he actually took a penalty himself. So he still, for me, remains England's #1. But Dean Henderson showed the other night or the other afternoon that he is a contender as well. But, it's still going to take a lot to move Jordan Pickford. If you watch him in training, the intensity, the work rate that he puts in, throwing himself around, bouncing back up, training session in, training session out, game in, game out. And he's obviously very busy at Everton, given that, the slightly sort of porous defence occasionally in front of him. So don't write Jordan Pickford off yet.
So Dave, Henry saying Jordan Pickford very much #1, but we know with new managers they have different ideas, and that can make the incumbents nervous, and those on the fringe of things perhaps, excited that things could change.
Yeah, I think Gareth had his favourites, as most managers do, and to a certain extent, you want a core of players who are going to be playing pretty much game in, game out. Pickford, Henry's absolutely right. He's barely had a bad game for England until that Greece game the other night. He made the odd mistake, but he was really wobbly against Greece. He had a shocking performance. Actually, I don't think he was at fault for either of the goals directly, but he had a really poor performance. And was promptly dropped for the game in Finland, which Gareth very, very rarely did, even for friendlies. A lot of the other keepers have been in and around the squad for years. Have got very few caps between them. And yeah, I think a change in management is going to make everybody feel maybe slightly insecure, and that sort of insecurity, put it the other way, it's competition for places is not a bad thing for the England setup. Nick Pope, I think, has been unlucky. I think maybe his ability not quite as good with his feet as Pickford and other keepers was always a bit of a minus point for him, but he's been a top keeper for years. Henderson again, another candidate, and there are a few English candidates around that can put pressure on Pickford, certainly. Okay, great stuff, Dave, Henry. For now, thank you. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll look at more of the back pages. Manchester United are never far from the headlines, and their return to action in a tough week of fixtures is in the Telegraph. That's on the way.
You're watching Back Pages tonight, and welcome back to the Sun's chief sports writer, Dave Kidd, and sports writer and broadcaster, Henry Winter. Right, we are going to move on to talk about Pep Guardiola, and the Times on their digital section have said that, Edison says Manchester City have a manager in mind for when Pep Guardiola leaves. Henry, I mean, I guess this is a well-organised club that is succession planning. Pep will call time on his own career at Manchester City. I guess that goes without saying. So it's not a huge shock, and not putting Pep under huge pressure. Tell us about this one.
Well, I'm sure Manchester City would like Pep Guardiola to sign it for another year, which would give him a decade at Manchester City. I mean, why would you really want to lose the best manager in the world? I mean, he's an inspiration. You've seen how he has changed football in this country, where sort of grassroots teams, kids teams are sort of, they've got fullbacks stepping into midfield, and Pep's influence is absolutely huge. So Manchester City would completely want to him to stay on. I mean, I think it's interesting that the succession planning, as you rightly call it, Ruben Amorim, obviously he's highly regarded, done so well at Sporting Lisbon. He's only been a coach for 6-7 years, did well at Braga, made his name, and he's an outstanding coach. I mean, you've been running some of his interview today. I mean, he was quite sort of upbeat and saying, well, it's a media story, and just because Hugo Viana is going to Manchester City doesn't mean that I am as well. But, that is the sort of level that Manchester City will be looking at. I'm sure they'll also be looking at Xabi Alonso as well, unless he sort of heads to Real Madrid. So, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's Manchester City. You look at the squad, I'm sure the pay packet is hardly tiny. I'm sure, that they will be able to recruit from the very best, and Amorim is certainly up there.
Yeah, Dave, I mean, your colleague Martin Blackburn has this one, City Pep eds up in your paper, The Sun. I mean, you concur with what Henry says there. I guess the Hugo Viana link is suggesting Amorim would be probably top of their list.
Yeah, interesting that Edison has actually publicly said this, because obviously Guardiola has not confirmed he is leaving at the end of his contract, and City are very hopefully he'll stay. A lot might depend on the outcome of the ongoing hearing into the 115 Premier League charges. But irrespective of that, Guardiola's been there an awfully long while, and he's been at Bayern and at Barcelona previously for 3 years on each occasion as manager. So he was obviously there for longer before that. But we did not expect him when he first arrived at Manchester City to be there for any longer than 3-4 years. He's been there 9 years. So at some point, irrespective of the ongoing court case, etc., you wonder whether he might want a break or a fresh challenge. And that is, I think most people think the smart money is on this being his last season, but we shall see. Interesting that Edison should make that comment. But and Amorim has sort of become the obvious favourite since Hugo Viana agreed to become director of football, replacing Chiqui Begiristain. It makes a lot of sense in that Pep and Chiqui are very, very close friends. That manager, director of football dynamic is so good because they are two close allies, and that's when it works best. You've got so many clubs where a director of football and a manager can clash. The same dynamic would presumably exist between Amorim and Viana, so he becomes the obvious candidate, but we shall see.
Yeah, we shall see. From the blue half of Manchester to the red half, then, Henry, in the Telegraph, a story on Eric Ten Hag, who's never out the press for long, as he twin shadows over Ten Hag are cleared, but dark cloud still looms. Those twin shadows being Thomas Tuchel, we know what's happened to him, and Gareth Southgate, who's said that he's going to have a year off. Good news for Eric.
Yes, but that dark cloud still looms in terms of Brentford at the weekend. Thomas Frank is an outstanding manager. Apparently there was some contact between Manchester United and him in the past, and so no, absolutely, I think the those particular shadows may have moved on, and I mean, you could argue maybe another one in terms of Sir Alex Ferguson's shadow. He casts a long shadow because of his excellence as a manager, because of what he achieved at Manchester United, and the fact that Ineos decided in their wisdom that they didn't want to keep paying him £2 million a year for the ambassador. Well, whether rightly or wrongly, if Sir Alex Ferguson is going to have a slightly lesser profile, then maybe that might help Ten Hag, but you would also look at someone like Sir Alex Ferguson and say, well, he's absolutely the gold standard and what the players and the manager should be striving towards. So yeah, maybe it's three shadows, but he's got to deliver. He's lost one or two more players. There's doubts over Kobe Mainoo is definitely out. Garnacho, he's got to be tested properly, I assume, at Carrington tomorrow. So look, there are always issues with Manchester United, and literally he's almost fighting game by game to keep his job.
Yeah, and that game by game, Dave, Henry mentioned Brentford being a tough game. It doesn't get much tougher than Fenerbahce in Istanbul, where a certain Jose Mourinho waits, and I'm sure he'd be very happy to stick the knife in because that's kind of the way he operates.
You took the words out of my mouth there. I'm off to Istanbul next week for that game, and it's going to be quite tasty, I think, and Jose will revel in it. I don't think he's had the best of starts, actually, at Fenerbahce, but I think Mourinho, more than most, enjoys maybe sticking the knife into former employers. I'm sure he has nothing against Ten Hag personally whatsoever, but I think he would revel in being the man who finished off Ten Hag. And Mourinho will tell us, I'm sure, that finishing second in the Premier League with Manchester United was one of his greatest achievements of his glittering career. He really rates that achievement. Just to have got close with United in the state they've been in the decade or so since Ferguson left. But yeah, that will be interesting. Brentford at home feels like the sort of game that United can easily lose. I think they lost at home to Fulham and Bournemouth last year. Brentford were a very good side, particularly set pieces, and we've seen how they keep scoring in the first minute. If they score in the first minute at Old Trafford on Saturday, then that's going to really get some nerves rattling, I think, in the home dugout. So we shall see. But yeah, I think it's interesting that both Southgate talking about having a sabbatical, being out of the picture, and Tuchel taking the England job. They were two of the leading candidates for the United job, but someone will always want that United job. If they decide to get rid of Ten Hag, I don't think the unavailability of those two guys is going to make a huge amount of difference.
OK, gentlemen, we have run out of time. One interesting story, so thank you to you both, in the Sun, is that Ben White is far from the top pro. Says he doesn't get in ice baths, he doesn't stretch, but he just doesn't get injured.